Welcome to the 2020 ASFPM Flood Conference, and this is the last track and last sessions for this wonderful week. We will be looking today to hear from three outstanding speakers in track J4, the Community Rating System Local Perspectives. So without further ado, let's hear from Lisa Foster, the Floodplain Administrator for Pinellas County, and the Magic CRS Activity Tracking Tool.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. Does your community participate in the community rating system? Do you have a PPI, Program for Public Information? Is it just for your community, or do you have a multi-jurisdictional program for public information? How are you tracking all of your documentation that you're doing for all the CRS activities as well as all of your outreach projects? Who's responsible for doing what? What is the protocol for implementing all those projects? How many times a year do you do them? How are you tracking that? Where are you storing your documentation? How do you remember who's done what and what still needs to be done? Hi, my name is Lisa Foster. I'm the Floodplain Administrator for Pinellas County. I'm happy to be here today to share a little bit about what Pinellas County is doing, and I look forward to hearing about the CRS strategies that you are implementing as well. Pinellas County is on the southeast corner of the United States. It's that little peninsula that you see hanging down there. Pinellas County has 24 municipalities plus the unincorporated area, so a total of 25 jurisdictions. And we are the most densely populated county in the southeastern United States. We also have 588 miles of coastline, 35 miles of beaches. So being a very urbanized county that is a peninsula on a peninsula in a subtropical climate with an extensive coastline, we also have numerous creeks that make us extremely susceptible to flood damage from multiple sources, whether it be heavy or extended rainfall causing that urbanized flooding or riverine flooding, or if we're having a tropical event or hurricane, that storm surge is a factor. And we're also seeing these days blue sky flooding from sea level rise. And of course, there's the risk of the combination thereof, of two of them, three of them, or all of them. So there's no question that we are susceptible to flooding here in Pinellas County. As may be expected, we also have a lot of NFIP policies here. We have over 125,000 individual policies with over $29 billion in coverage across the county. If you look at the entire state, you can see that Florida is a significant contributor to the NFIP. We're actually the #1 contributor to the NFIP in premiums paid and policies. We only see about 7% return on investment, so to speak, which I guess is a good thing. That means we haven't had that much flooding comparatively to the rest of the United States. But only about 7% of the payouts from the NFIP nationwide come back to Florida. Nonetheless, considering the increasing flood risk due to sea level rise and climate change, and with flood insurance rates on the rise, it's more critical than ever that we have a comprehensive floodplain management program, and not just a comprehensive program, but one that's centered on resiliency and sustainability. And also critical that we maintain our standing in the CRS program to ensure that flood insurance discount to keep flood insurance affordable. As I'm sure you're well aware, the community rating system has many benefits. When I first started in floodplain management and saw the CRS program, I thought, wow, what a great framework for a comprehensive floodplain management program. So even if you're not going to join the program for the other benefits, the outline of the program is really a great outline for a floodplain management program. And of course, if you have a comprehensive program, you'll reduce your flood losses and your flood risk over time. Also improve the recovery period after an event if you are doing the activity 610. And of course, probably the most popular benefit is the reduction of flood insurance rates for implementing those higher floodplain management standards. Countywide CRS discounts equate to over $27 million a year in savings. That's across the county, including all of the municipalities. Unincorporated is around $6 million. St. Pete is the other peak there. They cover about 30% of the county, and they're at about $10 million in savings. Unfortunately, it's really, really tedious to track all of the documentation for all the activities that you do in the program. It's you've got every activity has several elements, and it's the tracking of all those best management practices is incredibly cumbersome and takes a lot of resources, a lot of staff across multiple departments to do so. So back in 2014, the county took a look at their overall floodplain management program to see where they could better organize it or improve it. And one thing that came out of that was the establishment of a program for public information. At that time, it was brand new to the CRS program, but the county decided to take a stab at it to really try to streamline the outreach across not only departments, but across other agencies, and make sure that we had consistent flood messaging and outreach going on. So the committee started with about 8 of us, and we were a couple of realtors, some staff, a couple of residents, and so we just kind of got around and looked at the manual and tried to figure out, what our priorities were and where we wanted to go with it. And of course, streamlining and making sure we had consistent messaging were the key things. And then the realtors, of course, said that they really wanted outreach for the realtors. So that was actually one of the first projects we ramped up with. We did a lot of projects, including the realtor program countywide, but our PPI was only for unincorporated. We just kind of wanted to get our feet wet before we opened it up to any of the municipalities. Skip ahead to today, and you see in that picture a lot more than 8 people. So this is our current PPI working group, and we actually named it Flood Risk and Mitigation Public Information Working Group, because this working group also contributes to our local mitigation strategy that serves as our floodplain management plan. And they also worked on the flood insurance improvement plan and the flood warning and response outreach package. So this working group has been a busybody for the past year, pulling together our 5-year update, which we opened up as a multi-jurisdictional plan. So we have about 2/3 of our municipalities participating in this plan. And as if it wasn't hard enough tracking all of the outreach already, now we've got something like 18 communities and over 50 people in the working group. And it's become even more cumbersome to track everything. So it became very apparent very quickly and pretty early on that we were going to need some sort of tool to keep this thing organized, or it wasn't going to work. Libby, our very brilliant PIO, suggested a toolkit like we had used for the marketing campaign for our Penny for Pinellas tax. It's a 1-cent sales tax, which ends up being primarily paid for by our tourism tourists that come down, and all of what is earned from that penny tax goes towards capital projects, which improve the county overall, including the municipalities. So joint projects, single municipal projects, unincorporated projects, etc. It goes into the capital program. So anyhow, the marketing campaign for that was sort of where we started. It was a web page with all the resources for all the municipalities to grab so that they could promote the Penny for Pinellas referendum. And it had basically all the handouts, all the presentations, all the quick facts, just everything that we needed for that whole campaign was one-stop shop for the municipalities to grab. And as we discussed it, it became really apparent really quickly that this was not going to work for what we needed. And the first thing that came up was ADA compliance. This was right at the beginning of all those frivolous lawsuits about websites not being ADA compliant. And a lot of the material that we would put up here would be templates and content that was never intended for public consumption. What we needed to put out there was intended for our municipal partners to use to implement their projects. So they weren't final products that were going to be on the site. And it would have taken a lot of resources to go through and make sure everything was actually ADA compliant, when it wasn't necessary for it to be ADA compliant, because it wasn't the final document that was being put out or anything like that. So that was one concern. And then the other concern was, well, that's great for providing the information, but what about organizing the information? What about the table that we need to make for who's doing what projects, right? Every project's not going to be appropriate for every participating jurisdiction, and every jurisdiction isn't going to have the resources to implement every single project. So we needed to have a table that summarized who was doing what, as well as a way to track who was doing what and what had been done. So we decided to go with the SharePoint platform. You need to sign in to get to it, so ADA compliance is not an issue. We set it up to try to keep it very simple for the municipalities to use. They've all got their own logins, and it's basically a 3-step process, and I'll walk you through the tool in just a moment here. So we've got just kind of overall, you've got some resources on the side, and then you've got 3 main boxes. And the first thing the municipalities need to do is select their projects. And then they go in and they can see how to implement their projects. Then they can upload their documentation. We also added a calendar and have recommended dates on here. The municipalities don't have to implement on those exact dates, but it's set up to have reminders so the municipalities don't forget to implement anything. So let's take a tour. So the first thing that needs to be completed is that project selection. So the communities will go in and click on that. We have a lot of projects detailed in the PPI plan, and all those projects have been transferred over to this site. So basically the municipality goes in and they select their municipality and they select which projects they want to do, and then they dump them onto the thing on the side. You can add and remove back and forth projects when you highlight things. And they get put onto the master table, and that master PPI list is what ISO will need to know which participating community is doing which project. So we can just send this to ISO. They have their list. Okay, we know that this jurisdiction is doing these 3 projects, this jurisdiction is doing 5, this one is doing 8, whatever it might be. And then once they've selected which projects they're going to do, and I will mention one more thing, it's twofold. There's outreach projects for Blue Sky, and then there's the flood warning and response projects as well. So once they've selected their projects, they'll come over to step 2, project instructions, and they'll get the list of all the projects. So say somebody's getting ready to do the repetitive loss area mail out, they'll come over and they'll click on the link, and when they click on that link, it will bring them to the instructions page, and there's just a small blurb there. Some of them have a more extensive piece of information there to just explain how to go about implementing these projects. And then there's, at the bottom, you'll see the documentation. So this one is just the template that they can use, and it's all marked up. They know they have to go in and change everything that's yellow. They know which topics are being covered where, credit criteria for certain activities, publicity for certain activities. It's all marked up, and they can use that to develop their repetitive loss letter that they mail out to their rep loss areas. And then we have the flood response projects, and this was an interesting one because we had just made a toolbox specifically for flood warning and response. So trying to combine the 2 of them was a little bit tricky. So what we did was we broke it out just like we did with the Blue Sky, every single dissemination method. So we have Alert Pinellas, people that have signed up for it, people that have not signed up for it, etc. And then there's a link, but this link goes to the same thing on every single project because this is a toolbox within a toolbox, if you will. So our flood warning and response toolbox is set up. There's a list of all of the dissemination methods, which are basically the projects. And then there's all the messages. And of course, like an ITS sign can only hold very few words. So that message is going to look different than, say, a Facebook post, than an Alert Pinellas email, etc. So the verbiage for each outreach method needed to be modified to fit that particular dissemination method. And then of course we have different messages depending on where we are with whatever event is going on. So we have before, during, and after. So we've got them color coded. I'm sorry, I'm looking over here. I have two monitors. So during is this kind of mauve color. So you can say, okay, well, I'm going to do an ITS side during, and that during says, do not drive through flooded roadways, because that's all you can fit on that sign. But the social media says, turn around, don't drown, only 6 inches, fast moving water can sweep you away, da, 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 da. So it's a little bit longer. And then of course there's going to be a photo associated with that as well. So then the last thing that they need to do is come in and upload their documentation. So now they have signed up for their projects. They have gone in, figured out how to do their projects. They've done their projects, and now they're going to upload their projects so that they're filing away all their things and they know that that project has been completed. So they'll come over here, they'll hit the little upload button, and they'll get a pop-up. They can browse to the file that they're going to upload. So for the rep loss letter, it's probably a copy of the letter, and maybe they've combined in the PDF the mailing list, for example. So you've got the mailing list and the letter. It might be 2 files, and that's fine. You can upload it as 2 files. And then they'll get this. So you'll have your name of the file. So I name mine based on the outreach number that I have on my separate scoring spreadsheet. But if they don't have it named appropriately, sorry, I keep clicking. If they don't have it named appropriately, they can type that title in there, whatever the name of the project is that they're working on. They pick their municipality. They get to file it under the correct project name. Implementation, they have a choice to leave that blank, or they can put first, second, third, fourth, fifth. As you know, projects can be implemented up to 5 times. So they'll pick which implementation it is. If say this was a rep loss letter mail out, they would say repetitive loss area mail out, first implementation. And then if they do it again in 6 months, they'd come back in and they'd say, well, this is the second implementation. And then they can put in the date. So you don't have to upload it the day that you do it. You can backdate it to whenever you actually did do the mail out. And then you can put down which activity it's covering the publicity for. And then you just check it in. And it ends up on the list. So this list you can sort by municipality, you can sort it by project. So if say ISO has the master project jurisdiction list, and they say, okay, who is doing or who has completed their rep loss area mail out? They can come over here and they can pick project name rep loss area mail out, and they'll get the list of all the rep loss area mail out projects only. So they'll see what jurisdiction has submitted it. They can also pick the municipality. Say they just want to look at unincorporated Pinellas County, which I picked here. You'll see all the ones that we've uploaded for our unincorporated documentation. And then they can download this. So I shared with ISO the link to this. So we've sent them the invitation to join. And you know how funny it is, they can't access certain software. So we don't know yet if this is going to work. But if it doesn't work, it's fine. We can download everything from here and zip it up and send it to ISO. The intent was to make their life easier too. So they sign in and they're looking for one of our, they got their hands full with us. We're 25 jurisdictions, 23 of which participate in the CRS program. So we were actually trying to make it easier for them as well. So if they come in and they just want to look at, I don't know, City of Clearwater, they can pick City of Clearwater and see what City of Clearwater has submitted, and then download the information that they need to upload to their system. So that's the documentation tracking part. And then we also have resources over on the left-hand side. So this is the LMS and PPI plan. We consolidated everything together. Our local mitigation strategy serves as our floodplain management plan, and our program for public information is the outreach arm of the floodplain management plan. And it seemed confusing to have this program for public information over here, and then our floodplain management plan is in the LMS, and then separately we had outreach projects when truly our flood outreach is our PPI. So we said, let's just put the PPI into the local mitigation strategy, and that's our outreach appendix for the local mitigation strategy flood hazard. There are other hazards in there. So it's all packaged up together. So that's a resource for all the municipalities. If they forget, what the messages were, they can come in here and grab the PPI appendix and open it up and see everything that they need to see. We also added a discussion board, which interestingly tonight, I noticed one of my municipalities had written a question about a month ago and I never got an alert for it. So I have to set my alerts up. But you can opt in to get alerts when people post on the discussion board so that you can go back and forth if you have questions. Her specific question was, do the letters go to the areas or just the properties? So I did just respond to that, but I had addressed their question over the phone earlier. So that's about it for the toolbox. The SharePoint platform, I think, is going to be good. This is all pretty new. So far, it looks like it's working out well for us. I already feel the need to add more things. So I think we'll probably end up adding all of the activities that are directly related to the PPI to start, like your flood map information service, flood insurance, technical assistance service, property protection consultation service, a place to upload those logs, since the mandatory publicity for those is technically an outreach project, which is in here, and that will help keep those pieces together. So I would say that that's probably the next step with this tool. And then thereafter, maybe we grow it to track all things CRS, but we'll see. We need to kind of test drive it and see how it goes. So that's about all I have on that. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. That was an excellent presentation on your magic tool for the CRS program, especially for the program for public information and all those many projects that you must manage for all those jurisdictions. We did have some questions. I think they're good questions. One question Diana had is the project setup aimed at jurisdictions or also agencies and departments, or was it just for jurisdictions only?
So right now, the intent of this tool is to get all the jurisdictions that participated in that multi-jurisdictional PPI to submit their documentation and be able to retrieve the instructions to implement their own outreach within their jurisdictions. We do a lot of projects countywide, and I'm uploading those, but then they have to do, like, they might have their own hurricane meeting, or they'll mail out their own rep loss area letters. They'll do their own utility bill insert, those kind of projects. They would have to upload those here. So the original intent of this was for the municipalities. I'm still collecting things from the departments for the other CRS activities at this time, but I see this growing.
Obviously, yeah. Another question, Maria wants to know, what is the program that was used to collect the municipality information? Or where do you house your platform? This is a SharePoint platform. We vetted through several options, and this just seemed like the most viable, especially with all the ADA compliance stuff. If you have an external facing website that somebody might stumble on. Mm-hmm. Also, the question would be, from my perspective to you, is you've got this wonderful SharePoint platform. Do communities actually go to it and use it, or do you have to encourage them? Or do you have calendar reminders that pop up on their calendar, say, now it's time for this particular activity to be sent out, and they get a notice?
So both, yes. We have the calendar invites. We're still adding things to this, so this is still in the really, really early phases of implementation. So I've added items like the critical items: mail your rep loss letters out, do your utility bill insert. Some of the critical projects I've got on the calendar with reminders. So all the members of the site will get those reminders, and that automated reminder will kind of initiate them to say, oh, I got to upload that to the site. But then they would go and sign into the site and do it. We've had a couple of training sessions on it, and we'll do a couple more as ISO starts requesting documentation and municipalities need to start getting the ducks in a row. I think that's when we'll really ramp up with it.
Perfect. Jessica would like to know, is it possible that you could share this tool with other jurisdictions?
If I can, I am happy to. I have to check with our IT folks that help build it to see. I know in GIS you can like export a schema and give it to somebody so that they can, have that base database. I don't know how SharePoint works, but I can find out.
And a question I have that I'm curious about is from a time management perspective. Um, can you envision, or have you looked at what kind of a time saver creating this tool would be for all the communities, including your county, for this implementation of Activity 330, the PPI?
I haven't done an actual time analysis. It's taken quite a bit of time to put this together because every time I'm working in it, I find something else that could be improved or added or tweaked. I think once we get it built, I think it'll always be a living thing that we're going to modify. But once we get it to where municipalities are uploading things, I think it's going to be a huge time saver. Obviously, the municipalities are going to have the documents saved on their computer too, but this is, and I think it'll be easier for ISO, honestly. They can go in, pick the municipality, and just grab all the documentation for all the outreach right off the bat. So I think it's going to be a big time saver in the long run.
I would think so. There was a question that someone asked with regard to how did you pay for this? Was this just staff time, or was there some budget you had allocated for this?
So the tool itself is staff time. I did a lot of it myself, and once IT, it's BTS, Business Technology Services, I worked with them to get the whole program set up, and then I started adding things to it. So they kind of got the baseline there. I started playing around with it, and then met with them again, had them modify a few things. So it's been kind of back and forth, but it's really been staff time. If I had to add up the hours, I would say we might be combined at like 20 hours, if that, for building it.
There was a question about your IT department and how involved they were in the actual initiation of the whole SharePoint platform.
So it was initially the public information officers and myself that were going through trying to figure out, what the best way to organize this multi-jurisdictional PPI was. And of course, that was the driver of the entire thing because we have so many municipalities now in this one outreach document. Just trying to streamline the messaging and the things that the citizens are receiving and how we could just kind of coordinate that and provide them with those resources. And in doing that, BTS ended up getting pulled in because we realized we couldn't go out to a website, and they would have been pulled in for a website too, but we had to pull them in and kind of pick their brains. So they were definitely involved in identifying SharePoint as the best option.
And lots of people are asking, can you share this? I'm just repeating the question.
I'm going to try.
Tom had a question. Did you say you have boilerplate forms that a community fills in different information to be pertinent to their particular jurisdiction?
We do for some of the outreach projects, for some of the main ones, like the repetitive loss letter is a repetitive loss letter that the community would just go in and change Pinellas County to, city of whichever city it is. We also have a lot of content for the utility bill inserts, which I think was in the presentation. I had a screenshot of the utility bill insert maybe, but the utility bill messages, and those are all from the PPI. So the PPI document is there too. So the messages are kind of all over the place. And then the templates, as I'm doing things, I'm posting them up there as templates for the municipalities to grab and modify and then implement.
And last question, I think I'm going to have this question, if I can, for you. In terms of managing that many jurisdictions, you had to have some system in place, but do you see that you can, over time, do an after-action report and say, hey, this is really the good part of this system, and this is not the good part of this system, and here's what we need to improve, and here's what we think is working really well? Absolutely.
I think this year of the beta testing is really going to be the year to see where it's working and where it's not working. And I will clarify, we do have some budget and consultants that help us with the implementation of the PPI itself. The tool, though, they were not involved in. That's internal. So we've got consultants. CC, who's also the executive director of FFMA, is on that team with Jones Edmonds. And, they've been helping us along with multi-jurisdictional PPI. So it's kind of two different pieces.
Gotcha. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for a great presentation and a wonderful tool. And we'll be looking forward to improvements and then also hearing from you in the future as to the success of the tool.
Thanks for having me.
All right, our next presenter for CRS Activity 420, which is open space preservation, designs for a successful open space program. So Chris Mason is the floodplain coordinator with Collier County, Florida. Take it away, Chris.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining the presentation today. My name is Christopher Mason, and I'm the floodplain coordinator of Collier County, Florida. Today I'll be outlining CRS Activity 420 and the steps to create a successful open space program. The presentation will be twofold. First, we will focus on the elements that comprise the activity, and then we will transition into the methodology that can produce the best results for a community submitting an initial application or a community updating their CRS portfolio. To begin, I would like to provide some background on Collier County's CRS participation. Collier County has been a CRS participating community since 1992. Collier County is currently a Class 5 community. The county has a very extensive open space program. Unincorporated Collier County measures 1,968 square miles in total area. Over 90% of the county is in a high-risk special flood hazard area. The county has in its possession 321 open space tracts that encompass almost 28,000 parcels and/or GIS polygons. 86% of Collier County open space lands are in a high-risk special flood hazard area. Collier County collects a large amount of points based on its open space lands in the special flood hazard area, as well as its organization of all required documentation. Open space point totals will vary amongst communities based on the size of jurisdiction and total open space lands located in the special flood hazard area. My goal today is to provide you with the framework to be successful in documenting potential open space lands for CRS credit. Starting off, we will look at the goals and objectives of Activity 420. The first goal of the activity is to prevent flood damage to insurable properties by keeping flood-prone lands free from development. The second goal of the activity is to protect and enhance the natural functions of floodplains. Activity 420 contains 8 creditable elements or activities of varying point values. Those elements are the following. The first element is open space preservation. This element is dedicated to the overall preservation of land within the special flood hazard area through ownership or regulations. This is the umbrella element of Activity 420. It is the foundation of Activity 420 and carries the largest point gathering potential. The second element is deed restrictions. This element offers credit for legal restrictions that ensure parcels credited for open space will never be developed. Our third element is natural functions open space. Credit is provided for open space lands that are preserved in or restored to their natural functions. Our fourth element is special flood hazard related open space. This element offers credit for open space preservation and low density zoning in areas that are subject to special flood related hazards. We will discuss what those special flood related hazards are a little bit later in the presentation. Our fifth element is coastal erosion open space. Credit is provided for open space lands that are subject to coastal erosion. Our sixth element is open space incentives. This element offers credit for local requirements and incentives that keep flood-prone portions of new development areas open from development. Our seventh element is low-density zoning. Credit is provided for zoning districts that require minimum parcel sizes that measure 5 acres or larger. Our eighth and final element is natural shoreline protection. This element offers credit for programs that protect natural channels and shorelines. We will take a closer, more detailed look at the activity elements later in the presentation. So let's talk about identifying potential open space lands. A community may acquire open space credit for dedicated preserved lands containing one or multiple parcels or lands protected through land development regulations and ordinances. The 2017 CRS Coordinators Manual defines open space lands that are free of buildings, filling, significant impervious cover, or other encroachments to flood flows. Vacant lands are not automatically eligible for credit. Potential acceptable lands must be protected from future development through regulations or by the property owner. Begin the identification process by researching preserved lands within the special flood hazard area that may garner the most credit, such as parcels with the largest area located in the special flood hazard area. You will want to identify parcels that fall entirely or partially within the special flood hazard area, regulatory floodplain, and, if mapped, coastal erosion or special flood-related hazard areas. Let's talk about different types of potential open space lands. First, we have public land. Public lands include state and local parks and easements intended to be kept as open space, which must be documented by the property owner. Examples include state, county, and city parks, publicly owned beaches or natural areas, school recreational sporting fields, and conservation easements dedicated to the community by developers. Federally owned and managed lands are not eligible for credit. Next, we have private lands. Private lands include private wildlife or nature preserves that are maintained for open space purposes. Those also have to be documented by the property owner. Examples include church retreats, hunting club lands, golf courses, nature preserves, and camping areas owned by nonprofit organizations. Some things to think about when identifying open space lands. Preserved lands must have regulations or ordinances that prohibit construction of new buildings, filling, grading, or other activities that obstruct flood flows or remove flood storage in areas subject to flooding. If an ordinance prohibits residential development in a V-zone, floodway, or other portion of the floodplain, a community may request open space preservation credit for only those areas of the floodplain that are zoned for residential use. The area where regulations are in effect must be mapped or defined by parcels or a legal description so it can be mapped. Credit is only provided for regulated lands that are undeveloped at the time of application for CRS credit. To summarize the open space land identification and potential candidate lists, see the following graphic that shows the identification and exclusion flow chart. First, we will want to identify areas that do not qualify for open space credit. We will then want to exclude federal lands and open waters. Bodies of water measuring 10 acres or more in area must be removed from the overall open space calculation. We will then also exclude parcels in which fill, storage, or encroachments may be placed. And we will finally exclude publicly owned lands which are not intended for open space uses, such as a vacant lot within an industrial park. Lastly, we will identify and calculate the portion of qualifying parcels covered by impervious surfaces, linear features, and rights of way that serve as development or use of an area. Now we will examine the method of calculating basic open space credit. Credit for preserved open space, which yields a maximum point total of 1,450 points, is based on the ratio of property or properties that are preserved within the special flood hazard area to the size, or rather the total size, of the special flood hazard area. This involves calculating the adjusted special flood hazard area. This is done by removing federal lands, if they exist, open waters, water bodies that measure 10 acres or more in size from the special flood hazard area, and removing letters of map change. Letters of map change would be removing parcels that have been removed from A or V zones by a letter of map change to an X zone. To determine the total credit for preserved open space located in the special flood hazard area, add up the total acreage for all parcels that qualify as preserved open space. This total will serve as the numerator for calculating the potential credit. Credit for preserved open space is calculated using the ratio of preserved open space in the regulatory floodplain to the total area of the special flood hazard area. This determines the impact adjustment. To calculate the impact adjustment ratio, divide the result from the total acreage preserved of open space in the special flood hazard area. In this case, that would be the adjusted special flood hazard area by the total acreage of the community's adjusted special flood hazard area. Then multiply the resulting ratio by the maximum number of points for the element, which is 1,450 points, to determine the total credit that can be awarded for these preserved open space parcels. This serves as the point total that can be earned for the first element of the activity, open space preservation. As you will see at the bottom of the slide, we provided an example calculation. This is Collier County's example as far as open space totals. So the total special flood hazard area or adjusted special flood hazard area for Collier County is 628,682 acres. The total creditable preserved open space in the regulatory floodplain is 268,193 acres. The ratio of creditable open space is divided by the adjusted special flood hazard area using the figures that we have discussed already. That produces an impact ratio of 0.43 or a percentage. The total open space points of 1,450 points are multiplied times that impact ratio, and we come up with a number of 623.5 points. This is the base point total for open space. This does not include additional credit, which we will discuss in upcoming slides. Moving forward, let's now talk about determining identified potential open space parcels or properties that will qualify for additional credit. At the beginning of the presentation, we discussed the 8 elements that are contained in Activity 420 briefly, with open space being the main umbrella credit. The following 7 elements provide additional credit beyond the first element, which is open space preservation. The first element that provides additional credit is deed restrictions. Generally, deed restrictions must prohibit new buildings and run with the title of the land and be amended only by a court for just cause. These can include public lands acquired with state or federal funding that require a deed restriction as a condition of funding, or including lands purchased through FEMA mitigation grant programs or other restrictions placed on a property by an agency, owner, or organization. Our next additional credit element is natural functions open space. These are parcels that qualify for open space preservation credit and may receive additional credit if they are preserved or restored to a natural state. If so, they may also qualify for even more credit if they have included or have been included in a natural floodplain functions plan or designated as a critical habitat for threatened or endangered species or designated as an open space corridor. Our third additional credit element is special flood related hazards open space. The CRS offers credit for preserved open space within areas subject to the following flood related hazards: uncertain flow paths, alluvial fans and channel migration, closed basin lakes, ice jams, land subsidence, mud flows, and tsunamis. To qualify, the community needs to delineate its special flood related hazard areas, and the areas must be subject to special hazard specific regulations credited under Activity 430, which is higher regulatory standards. Our fourth additional credit element is coastal erosion open space. The CRS offers bonus credit for preserved open space with community mapped coastal erosion hazard areas that are landward of a coastline eroding at a rate greater than or equal to 1.5 feet per year. To qualify, the community needs to have mapped its coastal erosion hazard areas and kept the maps updated for coastal erosion regulations. Our fifth additional credit element is open space incentives. Most communities have developed areas that are not preserved as open space through one of the means recognized under the open space preservation credit. The CRS recognizes that there are many tools that can encourage the property owners to keep the special flood hazard area unobstructed while a site is developed. Examples include density transfers, transfers of development rights, bonuses for avoiding special flood hazard areas or other sensitive areas, planned unit developments, cluster development, greenway or setback rules, and open space ratio credits for open space in the special flood hazard area. Our sixth additional credit element is low density zoning. Credit for zoning areas of the special flood hazard area to keep them substantially open. Zoning an area for agricultural, conservation, or large residential lots preserves more open space than allowing more intensive development. Low density zoning credit is available for undeveloped land with low density zoning districts, as well as for areas developed in accordance with density requirements with the special flood hazard area. Low density means that the size of the lot is at least 5 acres or more in size. Our last element that provides additional credit is natural shoreline protection. These are programs that protect channels and shorelines in their natural state and are credited in the natural shoreline protection element. These programs include regulations that govern development and construction, such as an ordinance or regulation that governs public and private construction activities. It also provides credit for local policies on public lands, such as a written community policy that covers shorelines and local parks. Protection is only available for channels or shorelines that are currently in their natural state. No concrete, riprap, levees, armoring, beach nourishment, dams, or other human intervention or other human impact that constrains the natural processes of the shoreline of a river, stream, lake, or ocean. With that, we will conclude the overview of Activity 420, and we will shift gears and focus on the methods to create a successful open space program. The most critical aspect of Activity 420 is the documentation of potential open space lands. The first step in the documentation process should be the creation of a base map or series of maps to spatially show the dispersion of open space lands within your community. Many communities employ GIS software to create the base map, however, it is not required. Depending on the community size, one map may be able to capture all open space lands. A community may need to create a map series to capture all open space lands. Within the base map, lands that qualify for additional credits such as deed restrictions, natural functions, open space, and special flood-related hazards open space, etc., can be identified on this map or map series as well. Your map exhibits will need to be accompanied by an open space lands inventory list. As we'll see in this slide, we've created a unique identifier for each open space tract, coupled with the total acreage of the tract, total acreage located in the special flood hazard area, and acreage qualifying for additional credit. In this case, that would be the natural functions open space. For open space lands that additional credit is sought, such as natural function open space 1 through 4, you may need to provide the potential open space lands management plan or similar documentation highlighting the language that qualifies the parcels for credit. As you can see in this slide, we have a particular preservation area here in Collier County. We provided the land management plan, and we also went through the document and highlighted the language of which pertain to the natural functions open space requirement. Okay, with that, we'll move on to creating the adjusted special flood hazard area. Honestly, I believe the easiest way to delineate the adjusted special flood hazard area is through GIS software. This will be a high-level overview on how to create the adjusted special flood hazard area. I realize that everyone attending this presentation is not a GIS tech. However, most communities do employ some level of GIS services, and this information can be passed along. The goal of creating the adjusted special flood hazard area is to determine the acreage and delineate flood zones beginning with A and V. Exclude federal lands if present, non-jurisdictional boundaries if present, large bodies of water and lands that contain letters of map change that remove parcels from the special flood hazard area. The steps to create the adjusted special flood hazard area are as follows. Save to your workspace the following feature classes: parcels, letters of map change, non-jurisdictional boundaries, special flood hazard area, and physical jurisdictional boundary. You will then create subsets of federally owned parcels, letters of map change, and A and V zones. Next, you will utilize the GIS erase tool to exclude non-jurisdictional boundaries, letters of map change, and federal parcels from the special flood hazard area layer. After that is completed, you will apply the GIS clip tool to clip or match the special flood hazard boundary to the jurisdictional boundary. In this slide, you can see Collier County with the overall or raw special flood hazard area represented in blue, which equals to 1.2 million acres of special flood hazard area, including A and V zones. In this slide, you can see the adjusted special flood hazard area equals 628,682 acres. A culmination of federal lands, non-jurisdictional boundaries, and letters of map change have been removed. The eastern side of Collier County is covered by large federally owned preserves, which have been removed. This slide shows the process of clipping or matching the potential open space lands overlaid on top of the special flood hazard area, or adjusted special flood hazard area. The potential open space is displayed in a transparent green color in order to show the adjusted special flood hazard area below. This slide shows the potential open space now matching the adjusted special flood hazard area after clipping or matching the open space to the adjusted special flood hazard. This action delineates portions of the open space land that are located in the special flood hazard area. This slide shows a close-up inspection of the result. You can see now that the green color now matches the blue color being the adjusted special flood hazard area, and now more or less you have holes punched in the open space area that's represented in green, and those holes that are punched in there are X zones. Those are areas that are non-special flood hazard areas. So basically your open space boundaries now match the adjusted special flood hazard boundary. Okay, we are headed for the finish line now. We'll discuss map exhibit presentation. As I mentioned earlier, depending on the size of the community, one map outlining the open space lands may suffice. For large communities, a series of maps may be a better avenue to displaying potential open space lands. In cases where communities require multiple maps, organization is very important. Map atlases may be an effective method to create a visual display that corresponds to the community's open space land and inventory list. As you can see on the slide for the South Florida Water Management District Conservation Easement open space lands located in Collier County, we created a map atlas. On the map directory page, we provided an inventory list showing the total acreage of the conservation easements and the total acreage of the conservation easements located in the adjusted special flood hazard area. Lastly, we listed the natural functions open space acreage and deed restriction acreage. This is an example of one of two of the maps that are contained in the map atlas. There were so many conservation easements that were managed by the South Florida Water Management District that we had many polygons, So we assigned a unique identifier, and we also created a boundary around those particular easements because they were not all contiguous. They were not all linked together. So at that point, we also put the inventory list on the map itself so the reviewer would be able to match up the unique identifier with that inventory list. Finally, it's a good practice to submit a user's guide or inventory of all documentation that is being submitted. This gives the reviewer a clear and organized contents list. Also to note, sometimes open space may have some confusing variables that need further explanation. It is best to put together further documentation in cases where the open space documentation can be confusing. For example, Collier County has what is called state-in holdings or state-owned property located within federally owned preserves such as Everglades National Park and the Big Cypress Preserve. We provided further explanation of those lands and produced property cards and a visual reference of the state-in holdings in map form. That concludes the presentation. I thank the ASFPM for the invitation to present, and I thank you, the audience, for attending this presentation. I'm available for any questions, and my contact information is listed on the last slide of the presentation. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to present.
Chris, thank you for a great presentation on the CRS, specifically for Activity 420, Open Space Preservation. Very informative. We do have some questions. One is from Maria. She wants to know, what's the difference between the elements special hazard open space, SHOS, and low density zoning? Can you explain the difference between those two? She'd like to know.
Sure. So special flood hazard related open spaces is going to center around special environmental circumstances such as land subsidence, let's say possible special coastal erosion zones, maybe areas subject to tsunamis or mud flows. It's going to, that particular element is going to center around those natural occurrences to keep those as open spaces. Some places that are definite hazards, maybe places that are subject to ice jams up north. Again, they're going to be areas that are subject to special hazards. As opposed to low density zoning is going to be credit that is provided for zoning districts that provide acreages that are allowed to be developed that are going to be larger parcel size, such as here in Collier County, we have zoning districts that cannot be developed for residential use per parcel unless they're larger than 5 acres, 10 acres, or 40 acres.
Thanks for that. I have a question in terms of, did you have to balance the amount of open space you were seeking versus the amount of credit you might get for higher regulatory standards, since obviously you don't get credit for higher standards in areas of open space? Did you have to balance any of those credit objectives before you decided how much open space credit you wanted to go for? Or did you just simply think we're going to take more open space credit because there is more potential credit there than under higher regulatory standards?
In Collier County, we have such a wealth of open space. We decided to focus really on just trying to get the max amount of points that we could. We really participate in about 3 of the sub-elements under what I call the general umbrella element of open space itself. We participate heavily in the natural functions open space and also in deed restrictions. So really, we were just going for the max amount of points we could because we have such an inventory here in Collier County.
Very good. I see if we have any other questions. There was a question with respect to, let's see if I can locate that question, from Alan, which he wanted to know, have there been any concerns about low density zoning due to the amount of infrastructure that could have impervious impacts and in areas that are considered to be low density, and that would take away that credit per se. Is there a worry about that?
Our low density zoning is going to be more rural. It's definitely going to be more rural. That's because where we're going to have our larger parcel sizes. So really, there have not been any concerns with impervious cover. We did score a number of points on low density zoning, but that has really never been a concern.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much. We enjoyed your presentation and your answers to those questions, and good luck in Collier County, and we'll move on to the next presentation. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, up next is our last presentation. The title is CRS Recommendations from Coastal Stakeholders and Viability of Regional CRS Support Positions in Virginia. And our presenter is the outstanding Mary-Carson Stiff. She's the Director of Policy at the Wetlands Watch. So, Mary-Carson, take it away.
Hi, my name is Mary-Carson Stiff. I'm the Director of Policy at Wetlands Watch. We are based in Norfolk, Virginia, and we work statewide to protect and conserve tidal wetlands. We do this primarily through our work with local governments and at the state level to promote nature-based solutions to sea level rise. The greatest threat to tidal wetlands is not really one-off development at this moment, but sea level rise. With 2 feet of sea level rise, we actually stand to lose 50 to 80% of our tidal wetlands in Virginia. And so we've shifted and are now working to promote solutions to sea level rise and working on adaptive planning, as well as working in programs like the CRS to promote sustainable and long-term solutions to increase flooding and sea level rise. So I'm thrilled to be here, wish that it was in person, and hope that you all are doing well. Hello from Southeastern Virginia. Today I'm going to be talking about 2 different projects that Wetlands Watch has been involved in, and I specifically have been working on, that are relevant to the audience here at ASFPM. The first project I'll be talking about is a list of CRS recommendations that have come from coastal stakeholders across the United States. And the second project I'll be talking about is a look at how regional CRS support positions could work in Virginia. I mentioned this somewhat briefly, but Wetlands Watch as an organization is interested and has been working in the CRS program for about 7 years now, and we're interested in the CRS because so many of the activities that earn credit in the program incentivize that long-term scale solution to the increased impacts of flooding related to sea level rise. The highest credit earning activities that we focus on in the CRS program are open space preservation and acquisition and relocation. When Wetlands Watch has been assessing the CRS as a way to help move the needle further and to increase the support for nature-based solutions, we really see value in these 2 activities specifically because our tidal wetlands have no opportunity to survive in the face of sea level rise unless there is space for them to migrate landward. And in order to do this, they need the right kind of landscape. And open space preservation and the elimination of hardened shorelines is one way that we can ensure or at least help the migration of wetlands. And then acquisition and relocation. Not only are these 2 activities long-term viable solutions to reduced damage from flooding, but these are also the long-term non-Band-Aid solutions to sea level rise in our communities. What's going on with the CRS in Virginia? Right now we have 26 communities participating, with 6 or more communities expressing interest in joining, but 6 that have actually initiated the joining process. This puts us at a 9% participation rate as compared to the national participation rate, which last I checked was about 6%. So we're doing great in Virginia. You can check out the policies in force and our premium amounts as of May 2020, and want to particularly note our $6.6 million savings. So it's an annual savings, and we are really glad that we can provide this benefit to our high-risk policyholders. This is a map from CRSresources.org. You can see that the majority of CRS communities are in our coastal zone, which stretches from DC and Northern Virginia down to Virginia Beach, which is adjacent to Norfolk, where we're located. But we work really in this whole coastal zone, and also on the Eastern Shore, which is the land mass connected to Maryland's Eastern Shore in Delaware. We have very high flood risk in the western part of the state as well, but the uptick in CRS communities is just not as strong in the western part of the state. The coastal communities experience flooding maybe a little bit more frequently, and so there are also the flood plain, the highest flood risks zones are actually larger in a lot of our coastal communities, and so there are more policies. And this is another reason why the coastal zone has seen more interest in the CRS program. It shouldn't be a surprise that our coastal zone management program is greatly interested in the CRS program, given the areas of CRS participation in Virginia. So CZM has been funding our work for a number of years in the CRS, and we've sort of been doing a lot of their research and outreach related to how they can figure out, the CZM program can figure out how to use the CRS best to incentivize resilience building. So in Virginia, CRS is very closely aligned with resilience, and we're a big part of that initiative, Wetlands Watch. So in FY17, which concluded in the fall of 2018, we did quite a bit of work under CZM's grants, which is passed through from NOAA. You can look at all of our reports and briefing documents on the reports tab at wetlandswatch.org. The first two projects listed here under FY17 are Virginia specific. The grant funding and financing resilience is a part of that data needs assessment, but it can be applicable to outside of Virginia. But the third and the fourth under FY17, these are the two projects that are the focus of this talk today. CRS recommendations, and then an assessment of how CRS regional coordination or multi-jurisdictional support could work in Virginia for CRS. I've included FY18's grants because they just concluded in this past fall. But because they are so closely aligned, the project that we completed for CZM and FY18 is so closely aligned with some of the work that we've been doing in FY17. I just wanted to include it here, and there's an opportunity there's a possibility that I'll be presenting on this project at next year's ASFPM. We conducted all-day workshops in 12 different communities in Virginia's coastal zone, providing them an opportunity to hear more about the CRS program, more about the NFIP, create a CRS team in their community, and then I basically provided a souped up version of a ISO quick check, made it Virginia specific and far more detailed, and then evaluated what could be an estimated potential class rating based on the responses and a lot of follow-up with the community staff that participated in that workshop. So really good experience and very interesting. I learned quite a bit and spent a lot of time with some really great people in coastal Virginia. So the first project that that I'm going to be presenting to you all is of national interest, and I had the great pleasure of speaking with people, many of whom may actually be listening in on this webinar, and I was looking forward to meeting so many of you in person. But nevertheless, the conversations that I had and informed the creation of this resource. So the Coastal Zone Management Program in Virginia was hearing quite a bit of feedback from coastal communities on how the CRS program works and doesn't work for them. And they wanted someone to kind of figure out if their feedback is shared elsewhere in the country. And so that was what this project really intended to do. I interviewed people from all of our major coasts, including the Great Lakes, Alaska, and Hawaii. And I tried to use user groups as the first step of entry unless I knew someone on those coasts who's very active in the CRS program, whether that's, active in their community or active regionally and even nationally. I tried to kind of hit the heavy hitters. And if I left you out, I so apologize. But when I didn't know of someone in Alaska, for example, or Hawaii, which turns out to be true, I didn't, I tried to use user groups as my point of entry. This Coastal Virginia CRS work group was used quite a bit in this project and in my interviews. I chair that work group, and we have representatives from most of our coastal zones, so it's very representative of Virginia at least. And then finally, I included other CRS stakeholders like Wetlands Watch. We are not CRS coordinators, but we try to have our pulse on what's going on with those people. So Sea Grant, universities, other nonprofits, et cetera, were also included in my interviews. So I asked people, do you feel as though the CRS program is helping you as a coastal community? Are there improvements that could be made to the program to better suit coastal specific needs? So I just want to give a, kind of a preface to this whole topic. A lot of what I'm going to share is based on feedback from those interviews. This is not a Wetlands Watch opinion. We may share some of these opinions of these people and stakeholders, but this is an account of what was shared with me. A lot of the comments were focused in these 4 activities, activity 420, 430, 520, and 530. And as it happens, these activities have a lot of the total points that are available. So total points for these 4 activities is around 9,000. Total points in the CRS program as a whole, 17,000. So what I did, I did this back of envelope map, which of course is nothing to speak of, but 54% of the eligible CRS credits are coming from activities where CRS stakeholders reported a lot of frustrations with how the credits are calculated and how that impacts coastal communities specifically. So I think that there is something here, and I'm glad that we did this work to suss out what people are thinking. In the report itself, recommendations are organized based on the CRS credit series in which they're located. And this is a list of the activity recommendations that were included. You'll see at the bottom of this list that there were miscellaneous recommendations. These are mostly associated with ISO and FEMA, the CRS manual, and I'll include some of those recommendations in this reporting out. So first I'm going to start with 2 different series that are the more substantive recommendations based on specific activities. I'm including elevation certificates just because I think that ECs are a huge part of the CRS program, and near perfection of the CRS of the ECs is essential to CRS participation, and it's a sore spot for a lot of CRS communities, and I'm sure it's a sore spot for a lot of ISO reviewers too. So I just think that, there were a lot of comments related to this activity, and so I wanted to be sure that I was capturing them appropriately. I think that, a lot of it has to do with the fact that surveyors are the ones completing the ECs and the floodplain administrators are the ones doing the check. And so oftentimes there isn't great collaboration between those 2 groups. And so that was a big part of what people were sharing. You'll notice that all of the recommendations are not tied to a specific person. This was on purpose. You can see a list of those people who were interviewed at the bottom or at the back of my report, but everything was kept anonymous for obvious reasons. Moving to acquisition and relocation recommendations. So it's interesting that the comments that I heard were, they were obviously just from coastal communities and coastal stakeholders, but there was a great difference between coastal communities reporting from an urban context and those reporting from a rural character context. I think that, that's really interesting and makes perfect sense to me that there would be a disparity, and I know that the CRS program nationally has tried to address some of those issues with making some activities work well in an urban context, or some don't, and there are ways to get credit in all different activities, which of course I know is the argument from the CRS powers that be, and it makes perfect sense. But I just, am including this as one of the examples because so many points are available in this program specifically. So there was a lot of commentary about how the credits are counted. There are two options for credit calculation, option 1 and option 2, and without going into excruciating detail that no one else would care about other than those deeply in the weeds of this activity, option 1 is capped at a certain number of points, but it's often the option that people elect to use, especially from those reporting in the coastal communities. But option 2 is where the majority and the bulk of the credits are. And so there was a recommendation from coastal communities that maybe something in the middle would be created to help out those communities where acquisition is really hard. So to go up higher in the conversation, acquisition and relocation in communities is really different. So if you look at letter B, there is a lot of political difficulty in doing acquisition in the coastal zone, primarily because the nature of flooding is so very different in the coastal zone versus the riverine zone, maybe upland in a state. So in Virginia, for example, riverine communities, their flooding is life or death in a lot of scenarios. And so acquisition has been very easy for them to encourage and incorporate into their mitigation strategy. Coastal communities, their flood risk is slow, it's very repetitive and frequent, but it's predictable. And so there isn't a lot of urgency and there isn't a lot of political support around moving people out of harm's way through acquisition, because it's not really a life or death situation unless we're talking about a storm, a major hurricane. So I think that it's important to note that political complications and political strength around this mitigation strategy and the CRS activity vary tremendously between riverine and coastal communities. And I think that coastal communities are exerting a whole lot more political capital to do acquisition than riverine communities because of that difference. So that is me speaking, Mary-Carson, and it was this is feedback that was definitely repeated by a lot of coastal stakeholders that were interviewed. So something to think about. I did include recommendations that were related to the administration of the CRS program, because the CRS program's manual is being updated with some frequency, and of course is going to be updated every 5 years going forward. And so there's always a call for suggestions on making the program better. So I wanted to be sure that that was included, even though it's not always a coastal specific recommendation. I think it's important to capture these when people are willing to provide insight. So they are included in this report for that reason. Again, ISO, FEMA administration of the CRS program. I think that, a lot of CRS coordinators specifically think that getting more information would be really helpful. ISO has lots of detailed notes and a breakdown of how credits work and don't work. And so getting that information in the hands of the CRS coordinators would be helpful to allow them to succeed better in the CRS program. So that was the first project that we are working on. I encourage everybody to take a look. There's so much good information, and all of the information in the report itself was sent to the ISO, FEMA, CRS people, and so they have seen it, and hopefully some of those recommendations may be incorporated in future iterations of the CRS program manual. This is the second project that we worked on. It is an analysis of how regional CRS support positions could work in Virginia. There's a lot of interest in this, primarily because the CRS is growing, and the interest is growing in the CRS program because of the increased flood insurance premiums. And so, there's a big disparity between what some communities are capable of doing in terms of CRS program administration and keeping up with all of the changes in the CRS program. There's a big difference between what some communities can do and what others don't have capacity to do. This report is somewhat of a beast in that it takes on 3 separate integral parts. The first is to outline feedback that we, Wetlands Watch, created or we initiated to figure out who is interested in what kind of cost share position. So this is kind of like the meat and potatoes of this report, and I'll be speaking about that. But then it also summarized the discussion from a workshop that was held, hosted by Virginia Sea Grant at William & Mary, that invited professors who specialize in how to keep programs going and how to do technical assistance at a state or local regional level. They offered recommendations for how we could set up CRS technical assistance in Virginia. And then finally, it's to distribute this great graduate student report that was done in tandem with the workshop, Financing Strategies workshop that was held at William & Mary. This is William & Mary graduate student work. I am a William & Mary graduate student graduate as well, so a lot of pride around these. The student work is really excellent, and I would encourage everybody to take a look. They did an analysis and interviewed people from across the country on how CRS technical assistance is funded and how it's organized, and so really good work coming out of that project. So the first part of this was Wetlands Watch interviewing people, asking them, hey, do you need CRS support, technical assistance? What does that look like? How much do you need? How much do you want? And then ask them, how do you think this should be funded? So this was a really interesting exercise, and talking with the people with whom we work quite a bit and some that we don't work with yet or at all. And the outcomes were interesting. So the majority of all the people interviewed said, yes, we support some creation of cross-jurisdictional CRS technical assistance support and a staff person to do that work. But this level of assistance that there was interest in was varying tremendously by region, varied by rural versus urban community character, and then staff capacity and the differences there, which is integrated into all of those different conditions as well. So what came out of it? 2 different recommendations for how to structure multi-jurisdictional CRS support sharing. The first is less technical assistance support position. So this was coming from communities and stakeholders in the large and urban areas, which are primarily Southampton Roads and Northern Virginia. They feel as though they have a lot of staff capacity, and if they don't have the staff capacity, then they have the money to hire CRS consultant work. And they feel as though this role of CRS support could be filled by a CRS coach, someone who could provide regional collaboration on how to get credit across multiple communities, how to provide continuing education for CECs and to improve everyone's understanding of the CRS program and how they can do better, and then to coordinate with FEMA as well. So this is kind of what is in existence in Virginia right now, and I think that I can safely say that I provide a CRS coach type position currently, but we're funded on soft money, which is somewhat problematic, of course. And so the options to finance someone like this, I'm not saying this is me for the funding piece of this, because I'm not sure I want to stay in this role forever, but there are thoughts about how this could be funded, and you can read that for yourself. I will say that the recommendation to apply for FEMA hazard mitigation assistance didn't pan out. We applied for the 5% initiative through an HMGP source, and we're not awarded that support. So I think it's harder than, it's a lot harder to get that FEMA support. The second option for technical assistance is far more technical assistance, right? So it's doing more for CRS communities. This is feedback coming from small rural localities, and they were from all across the state, not just from the coastal zone, for example. The staff burden for the CRS program is a deterrent to joining, period. And so without having someone who could be dedicated to following all of the nuances of the CRS program and all of the updates to the CRS program, the thought of joining is just too insurmountable for many communities. So this is true for communities that haven't joined yet, and this is true for people the localities that are really at like a class 9 or class 8. There were some financing options that were discussed: hosting a position in the local PDC, contribution to the salary from the CRS community as a part of that Planning District Commission is what PDC stands for. Many communities said, you know what, this is putting the cart way before the horse. We're just not even ready to talk about this because of so many of the issues listed here. And the recommendation that came out of those communities was the creation of more CRS program intentional outreach and information. And the CZM grant that I described earlier, where Wetlands Watch went in and met with CRS, with communities and gave them a full debriefing on what the CRS program is, and then provided some analysis on how they could expect to score if they were to participate. We tried to address the need that came up in the previous grant. So I hope that that's helped, and time will tell as we see if more people join. Finally, the summary of the finance workshop was included in this report, and it's really interesting. And basically, to summarize very quickly, there's an issue with the CRS technical assistance coming from a nonprofit organization without a dedicated funding stream. Our state agency that runs our floodplain program has a CRS coordinator kind of couched out, but there's little to no funding support for this person doing this work. And so that is ultimately problematic for researchers who are intended to address how to help finance technical assistance statewide or even regionally. This lack of continued funding is a real problem, which we know, and which is why we asked for the workshop to occur. So you can read about those discussion points further in the report. Finally, this is the student project that I was bragging about, and it's included as an appendix to the report that I'm discussing right now. And you just have to take a look at this. These students did such a good job. They called people from across the country. You can quickly see which states have an innovative funding stream through the $, and you can look at outreach and who does that best. And they even looked at what community or what states have state codes that explicitly reference the CRS program, which I think shows where the priorities are in those states as it relates to CRS. And then finally, they created these state profiles that include contact information and ways that if you're interested in developing a program similar to the state of Idaho, you could take a look and figure out how to do that and contact people directly. So that's what we've been up to. I really appreciate it. I know I've gone a little bit over, but I just wanted to share what we've been doing, and I look forward to connecting with you all at some point and can answer questions. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mary-Carson, for an outstanding presentation on what's happening with CRS communities in Virginia, especially the coastal communities. And I appreciate you sharing that information with the group today. I want to also think that you have put together a study which can be accessed online, and someone did share that information, and Mary-Carson is here to answer the question. So I appreciate the person that did share the link to the Wetlands Watch report on the chat box. So Mary-Carson, we've got some questions for you. And one was, what are the obstacles you see for Virginia communities joining the CRS program? What are the biggest obstacles you see?
So the biggest obstacles would definitely be staff capacity. We've met with so many local staff who've said we're barely maintaining our NFIP participation as it is, and so to take on anything additional would be overly burdensome and just not possible at all.
And did just as out of curiosity, did policy base have any bearing on that?
To a degree, it's interesting. The majority of communities that have high policies are in our more urbanized regions. We do have one county that's in a very rural part of coastal Virginia that has a very high policy count, but they are struggling to figure out if they're going to join or not, and that issue is largely political. There is a very anti-government base in this region, in this community, and so that's been more of a factor than anything else.
And has it been difficult to identify what I would call a champion for the CRS in a community, a specific person, or has that been an easy thing to identify?
It really depends on each different community. I think that if you have one person who has the CRS bug and 12 other people that seem so immune to it, then that person seems to persevere and a lot seems to get done. But that person has to be bit by a strong enough spider, I guess. It really has depended. Someone might think, oh, the CRS sounds great, and I know that it's something that would benefit our community beyond just flood insurance premium discounts, but there's not enough time to really push it forward, and so it falls to the wayside.
And one other question I think was that I had actually is when you talked about the for acquisition relocation activity 520 option 1 versus option 2, are you seeing from the jurisdictional level that the credit is coming from particularly FEMA buyouts, or are some of the buyouts happening through a stormwater utility and they have money set aside to buy structures out, or both?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I did see one of the questions about coastal property being of higher value. Mm-hmm. And that is exactly the issue, or one of the issues. Higher property values are an impediment to easy benefit cost ratio achievement. And that is something that, has definitely come up as a stressor for more buyouts to be done. They obviously cost more money when property value is higher, so that's another factor. Almost all of our buyouts are done through FEMA dollars and some HUD dollars. However, that's starting to change ever so slowly, and your reference to stormwater funding is one example of a community that's relied mostly on stormwater funding rather than FEMA grants. And that's the city of Newport News as an example there.
And what's the, with this actual report that all this data is included in, is there going to be an update or a companion to it in the future, or is this a one and done?
So it's the CRS kind of outreach to the coastal communities. Right now, it's a one and done, just because that's the nature of the Coastal Zone Management Program grants. We're not against trying to revisit communities and get an update, especially after the new manuals launch in that 5-year iteration period, if that's how it rolls out. I think that, knowing how certain changes, especially with the attention to future conditions, open up doors for other communities in the coastal zone who are dealing with a lot of future conditions issues. That might be something that's of help to level the playing field. I'm not really sure, but I'd be happy to discuss it, and I'm open to it.
Excellent. I thank you, Mary-Carson, for being here. You can stick around on the chat box and answer some additional questions. But thank you for a great presentation and what you're doing in the state of Virginia. I think all the communities are valued by what Wetlands Watch is doing and you are doing for them. So I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry I was delayed.
And just to let you know that we appreciate everybody with the attending the conference this year. I think it's been a great virtual conference. This is the last block of sessions. So thank everyone for attending this session and for attending the conference. We really do appreciate it. And we'll see you next year.